if rhizopus gets in, it starts to colonize those hulls, but then it starts to produce such abundant fumaric acid that fumaric acid is water diffusible, and it works its way upstream from the transpiration flow of water, which is going from the roots up to the tips of the shoots. But when you're killing a tissue, these acids that are being produced are working their way against that water flow into the stem tissue and causing dieback. And so some situations, some not all these rhizopus are identical. They might have greater fumaric acid production. They'll actually cause greater dieback in some locations than others. So the goal is to keep the rhizopus from getting into and colonizing those hulls. The more hulls that are colonized, if you have one, think of it this way, if you have one hull colonized on a branch versus 5 or 10, just think the exponential amount of fumaric acid entering into that shoot. And so then you get greater dieback. So the goal is to try to keep those hull split infections, especially by rhizopus, because that's the predominant one, to a minimum, that you don't get abundant attacks that will then cause the whole shoot. And we've seen even 1-inch shoots dying back, and the problem is that a lot of these, we had a disease, there's a disease complex known as lower limb dieback. And we think that rhizopus is a direct component of that. We're not saying it's all of it, but it has a lingering effect. And we call that a polyetic effect, meaning that it's going to, not what you see here is going to affect next year, because those acids that are produced still diffuse into that branch, and we get continued death over the, from, say it happens in August, you see the initial spurs dying and some smaller branches dying. But if you have, say, 5 or 10 of those on a single branch, that's maybe a 1-inch or 2-inch branch, a scaffold branch. Well, next year that branch won't come back as healthy as a non-infected branch. And so then that branch gets really weakened and it gets susceptible to other pathogens and eventually dies. And so if you have an orchard that has poor hull rot management, you'll see all these lower limbs dying in those lower canopy where the humidity is the highest, the light, there's not good light penetration, so things stay wet a long time. And so that's where we see the hull rot dieback. And the goal is to prevent that hulls from getting infected. We never want to see, the 90, 80 hull strikes per tree. That means there's multiple infections on each scaffold branch, and that's going to lead to more and more dieback. So if we can get things down even 50 to 75%, we're going to have a lot less branch dieback, because there's a lot less acids going into the main branches, which keeps those branches from producing next year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good.
We got a question from Derek here. It says, if a grower was going to do 2 hull split sprays 10 to 14 days apart and planning to use a fungicide and dicap, how would you advise positioning those? Fungicide in the first spray and dicap in the follow-up. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, based on what we were just talking about, I think if you're in areas where there's not much stone fruit production, you're primarily dealing with rhizopus. So my comments are focusing on rhizopus stolonifer hull rot. And so if we are thinking about that situation, I think that the dicap has got to go on initially. And then you can, if you're trying to do a rotation program, you can put a fungicide on. Or if you had, everybody's different, they sometimes they have severe hull rot. Well, obviously we've mixed dicap with fungicides. And if you had a severe problem last year and you want to get this under control, you don't want to see the dieback next year, and you want to prune some of that stuff out that died, and then you want to get on this thing at the whole split stage so that you don't have that the following year. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things go into these decision-making processes, but A rotation of dicap with followed by a fungicide makes sense. Or if you have a lot of disease and you really want to, you're in a location that you got hit hard by that disease, whole rot, I would think you could do a mixture, a dicap with a fungicide at the beginning of whole split, followed up 2 weeks later in mid whole split stage. So you can do, if you're not so bad off, you could do a rotation. And if you're really bad off, I probably would do a tank mixture of both.
Combination. I would say what I see, I would say in the field, I see probably more combinations, and probably where they've had a history, like you're saying, where they will do a combination treatment. But it's a great question.
Yeah, but I think these treatments are showing such consistency, and I mean, you see our multiple years of work. I think that if you have a bad problem, that's one way to approach it. And so we want to see fungicide rotation, so you can do the dicap twice, and then you can do one fungicide, say a group 3, and then you can switch to a group 11, and you're practicing resistance management with the fungicides, and you're using fertilizer like dicap as a way of balancing your nitrogen management issues, as well as your whatever else it's doing with these fumaric acids are present in the diseased tissue.